pause for a bit here, though. We can cover the top 5 in another video, because this is nearing a 20-minute mark now. Don't worry, that one won't take several months to make. I have all the footage and stuff I need already for the rest of it. Ah, hell. Okay, in my defense, things have gotten really busy, and I'm only just now making a dent in my backlog of stuff to do. Also, I procrastinate on this hella hard for reasons I can't comprehend, but anyway. Hey there, everybody! Seth here with the second part of the Caligula 2 playable boss rankings. It was a bit of a wait, but hopefully not too agonizing for you all. We're just gonna go ahead and continue where we left off before. Just as a small note, this list goes over who is overall the best in a fight against normal Digihead enemies. Boss killing definitely would give you a different list, but I will probably not bother making a video on that because, dear God, that would be a mess to do for a lot of reasons. I'll just say the fights would take well over 30 minutes to beat, and some bosses just outright wouldn't be able to kill most other bosses in a fight by themselves. There are a variety of ways you could test this sort of thing out, but I chose the rule set that I figured would be the most fair to everyone. If you haven't seen part 1 of this yet, I obviously advise you to go watch that first, since it explains all the rules and logic to my rankings here. I'll go ahead and stick a card for it in the top right corner. That said, time for top 5, baby! Funny enough, the top 5 positions of this are pretty clear cut, but this is also where it gets a bit more complicated due to not having to just judge the kill potential, but the overall effectiveness of their kits as a whole. I suppose that could be a rather variable factor depending on what you're looking for in a party member. Small disclaimer aside, let's finish up this very, very overdue list and see who 5th place is. 5th place of the boss rankings, dead middle, goes to... this is the most heartbreaking one of them all. Wicked. Yep, she's not top 1, and I am fucking pissed! What did they do to you between games? Your party member in Overdose was perfect! How dare they nerf you in this game? Fucked up fact, her base attack stats are actually lower than regular Marie's. I'm sorry, this does actually tilt me quite a bit. The true goddess of Caligula sneaks in with a time of about 5 minutes. Most will probably recall that I personally believed her to be top 1 in the game, and I was very certain of this until now. Wicked here was actually one of the biggest obstacles for this video as a whole, as she is at a desperately unfair handicap to the bosses in the base game. Her equipment and level were weaker and lower than that of all the rematch bosses. Of course, that is no longer an issue in this case with my own little bit of meddling. Even then, though, she just can't get any faster in this than 5 minutes. She falls in the same category as Bluffman in that she takes skill to do very well with, and it shows way more in her case. I did more runs with her than anyone else, and 5 minutes is what you get if you essentially play her perfectly. While she might be 5th place, do not take her lightly. You'll see very quickly just why she couldn't outpace everyone above her. And if I added one criteria to my test conditions, she could be top 2 very easily. Anyway, Wicked is a very unique boss, and that due to her being, well, Marie, she actually functions very much like a real party member. This is amplified by the benefit of her being the only boss with both a ranged and a melee counter, and taking advantage of these can get risk breaks at a potentially unrivaled rate. Her tricks don't end there, though. In all her elegance, she of course possesses almost every tool you could ask for. Solid damage, good attack level, great debuffs, and a very good self-buff and heal skill that gives her amazing sustain. The skill in question, Survival Instinct, buffs a variety of stats, but most notably, her cast time. This is where she shines, because taking the time to stack 3 of these to put her into +3 cast makes her the fastest boss in the entire game, almost to the point where most moves are essentially in keyjack. Attack Disruption becomes nigh instantaneous melee counter with absolutely 0 recovery. This gives her great DPS and risk rates, as well as the ability to actually combo some skills like Dual Trigger afterward. The defense level on her attacks is also extremely high, with even moves like Desperado not knocking her out of her assault once they go active. Dynamite Extradite can be used to inflict triple bleed on good hits, ramping up her damage potential even more. On top of this, one of her equips grants her bonus damage on bleeding and airborne targets, rocketing it even higher. Her ultimate, Emancipation Detonation, is unfortunately a contender for worst boss ultimate though. It can, however, deal monstrous damage when boosted with triple attack from Survival Instinct on a bleeding target. As an extra note, the bombs actually seem to actively gravitate toward the enemy, unlike Marie's Lunatic Bomber Omega. I don't have a clip, unfortunately, but it's very hilarious to see. All this said, how could she possibly not be a top contender then? The fact of the matter is, the bosses above her are simply more efficient, take much less work, and truly exploit the broken nature of statuses in this game. That aside, Wicked with her damage, debuffs, self-sustain, and especially speed is undeniably very good. She also no doubt has the most well-rounded utility of anyone on this list. They are very lucky the writers and devs of Caligula won't allow her to unleash her true power. But one day it will be witnessed. The glory of Marie! Number 4! This is another one that's gonna shock a lot of you, I'm sure, because 4th place is none other than Machina! That's right, despite the absurdity of his moveset, not Genos is not in top 3. Yeah, okay, that was awful. Bad pun aside, it's quite a surprise indeed. I thought for sure he'd be at top 2 at least, but once again, results have said otherwise. Top 5 is nothing to scoff at, though. Not Genos here is another polarizing case with multiple factors to consider when it comes to getting his time. The fastest time I could record for him, however, was a considerably impressive 4 minutes and 4 seconds with directly controlled drones. Despite being the very first boss in the game, Machina is ironically one of the most ridiculous, sporting a moveset about on par with Wicked, all-around good stats, and his drones being amazing helpers. Similarly to Bluffman, Machina gets huge mileage off having them in the team with him. Unlike Bluffman, though, Machina doesn't need the drones to function well, and is actually acceptably capable of fighting without them. On top of that, unlike the Goshinkens, if the drones die, Machina can just spawn in 3 new ones to take their place! These little bastards are blessed with an extremely useful moveset that can very oppressively stagger enemies while providing support with flashbang for evasion debuffs and tailwind for cast time buffs. The real attractions on these things, though, are Analyze and Full Analysis. These attacks inflict the aptly aimed Analyze debuff to anything they hit, which can stack up to 3 times. This debuff is a massive boon to Machina, and why the drones are so important to him. What Analyze actually does is massively amplify the damage of any attack he lands on that enemy. And God help whatever you're aiming at if you get a crit on top of that. I'm pretty sure this punch literally did 30% of this thing's health in a single hit on a level 200 enemy. Keep in mind, these little shits at level 200 have hundreds of thousands of HP. As for Machina's own skill set, most of his attacks are an acceptable speed and cooldown, and the ones that aren't can either be easily ignored or so insanely good that the wait time is actually justified. This, however, gets cranked up to 11 when you remember that the drones can use Tailwind, allowing him to be even faster. This fucker on +3 cast time becomes the 3rd fastest boss in the game. He also possesses the only other boss skill besides Krankes that can guard break, giving him an effective punish to anyone thinking of just blocking against this beast. And as if all this isn't enough, Machina also has one of the best self-buff skills in the game with self-maintenance. While slow to activate, self-maintenance will restore a bunch of his HP, purge all debuffs, and give him 3 buff stacks of cast time and 1 of attack. This skill is absurd, and why they thought it would be fair on the first boss of the game is beyond me. And we haven't even gotten to the best part of his kit yet. That prestigious title probably has to go to the devastating Megiddo Burst Mark II, which might possibly be the best ultimate in the entire game. It takes a while to wind up, but oh boy is it worth it! The Missile Armageddon it delivers has a huge range and deals 6 hits, which inflicts 3 stacks of bleed! The cooldown afterward also restores 5% of his max health, and similarly to self-maintenance, purges every debuff on him! The combination of this and self-maintenance can make debuffs on him almost completely useless. The only real downside to Megiddoverse is that it can't crit like most boss ultimates can. Analyze stacks combined with bleed are an absolute war crime, and Megiddoverse boosted by both and a few attack buff stacks is probably the single highest amount of direct damage any boss in the game is capable of. I am getting to address the elephant in the room now, though. How the hell is this technological terror only sitting at 4th place? Well, you'll see why that's the case in the next entry. But even the super weapon that is not Genos does possess a few flaws that should be made known. For starters, it's extremely easy for some reason for enemies to flinch him out of his attacks. This is especially bad on his slower but extremely valuable skills like Megiddoverse and self-maintenance. Yes, these moves can heal and remove debuffs from him, but that's only if he can actually use them. While uncommon, it's not impossible to find yourself in a rather unfavorable scenario and unable to reliably get either of these skills off to help. Secondly, while I said Machina is acceptable without his drones, not having them is a huge downgrade since they're his only source of Analyze stacks. And without Analyze, his damage potential gets way lower. This is pretty much why I said he has some of the more polarizing run times of everyone on the list here. Whether the drones are AI controlled or not, similar to QP's digiheads, isn't much of a difference. It's just important for time that he does have them at all whatsoever. They are very much a part of why he's so high on this list. Even still though, despite that and some other quirks, Not Genos very commandingly cements himself a respectably high position on these rankings. Given he is a literal living weapon that technically never actually lost to the Go Home Club, this makes perfect sense, and I absolutely love and respect him for the badass he is. Now we're entering the top 3 stage. Our top 3 bosses here all share one thing in common, and that similarity is precisely what got them all this high up in the current rule set. Remember my talk of cheater advantages in the first video? Well, it's about to come full circle, as that is the epitome of our 3rd place candidate today. The one and only Regret. Those of you keeping up with all my showings of the bosses in this game will recall I originally thought she was trashed here. Good God, was I wrong about her. The goddess of Redo, carrying World War III on her back, clocked a time of 3 minutes and 31 seconds. A whole 30 seconds faster than Machina. Yep, this slow, barely mobile behemoth was actually able to out-DPS, bleed, and analyze. How the fuck did she do that, you're probably asking? She's possibly the overall slowest boss in the game on a baseline, and her helper enemies are actually next to worthless, only being slightly better than or even tying with MU-Kun's plush toy abominations. Slow she may be, though, she's the only enemy in the game that is passively completely immune to any sort of stagger or launching effect. Absolutely nothing can interrupt her attack, even during their long startup times. This trait alone carried her extremely hard, as most of the time losses for the other bosses were caused from being knocked away constantly, and any move you pick is almost guaranteed damage, since the enemy is too stupid to get out of the way. To further aid with her sluggish handicap, she has a very strong buff skill in the form of Enunciation. While not quite as good as Survival Instinct or Self-Maintenance, this skill will buff both her attack and cast time by 1, and is probably the 2nd fastest boss buff to boot. Stacking 3 of these makes the rest of her moveset much more usable, and the included attack buffs are of course a good bonus. Similarly to Self-Maintenance, it'll also purge any debuff she has. Unlike Self-Maintenance though, you won't have to worry about it being interrupted due to the aforementioned stagger immunity. Another unfair advantage in Regret's favor is that her base attack stat is actually slightly higher than every other boss in the game, with it being 90 instead of 80. Shockingly though, none of what I've mentioned so far has been the biggest reason behind her success. That would very ironically actually have to be one of her ultimates, Patriot Death. Or rather more specifically, Poison as a whole. Because Patriot Death inflicts 3 stacks of it, and the enemies we're fighting are very high level with very high HP, Poison serves to absolutely delete enemy HP faster than anything else in the game. Poison is the biggest culprit for deciding the top 3 positions, as each boss here has their own source of applying it. It's actually kind of disgusting. In addition to Poison, Patriot Death will also inflict 3 stacks of Bleed, which allows Hateful Arm to generate unholy amounts of bleed damage due to its high hit count. There's really not much else to say outside of that, honestly. Her blatant advantages over other bosses and the ability to very handily abuse how busted debuffs are in this game crown her as the 3rd strongest boss to use in your team, at least as far as mock clearing goes. That in mind, she is still painfully slow, and getting those Enunciation buffs is an absolute must. And even though you can cover for a long start before attacks, the recovery is a different story. Patriot Death might be really great, but if it gets blocked by chance, you've effectively wasted your turn or are stuck doing nothing for quite a while. These are probably the only real flaws she has, aside from the extreme reliance on Poison. Seems you managed to live up to the hype after all, Regret. Good job. Though I'm pissed you robbed Wicked and Machina out of the spots they more rightfully deserve. With our bronze medal awarded, we step up to silver. Admittedly, Regret and 2nd place have very similar times, so you could debate the positions a bit. I'm judging off of other factors as well, though, of course. And that's led me to our extremely baffling 2nd place runner-up being... Pandora! Boy, was I wrong about this character! Going from what I almost assured was a bottom 3 boss to apparently being the 2nd most practical one to use in the game? As absurd as it sounds, the clear times speak for themselves. Pandora managed to about tie Regret's time, getting a 3 minutes and 30 seconds with AI-controlled Digihead. But operating her Digiheads myself got an even more impressive time of 3 minutes and 18 seconds. The main reason for Pandora's newfound success, of course, being... Yep, you guessed it, Poison. Poison saved this character's ass! But unlike Regret, who inflicts it and then moves on, Pandora's entire moveset thrives and synergizes off of it. In fact, every attack Pandora has deals increased damage to poison enemies. The increase might not be as crazy as Machina with Analyze, but this takes her formerly mediocre damage and turns her into a legitimate threat. Another thing to address is that Pandora's moveset actually isn't as bad as I originally thought, or rather at least half of it isn't. Sticking to only using that good half of her moveset makes a world of difference. It won't make her a speed demon like Wicked, but it'll at least make her less sluggish and more bearable to control. As for these quote-unquote good attacks of hers, they would be the second and third Vine of Erosions, Flower of Decay, Cold-Blooded Spear, and Thorns of Destruction. Flower of Decay is her source of poison outside of her Digiheads, and the rest are moderately quick moves that deal upwards of 8 hits that can absolutely shred poison enemies. Speaking of Flower of Decay, let's also talk about how Pandora is absolutely, without a doubt, the tankiest and hardest to kill of everyone on this list. Cube of Denial is a trump card all its own. The barrier it activates not only makes all attacks hitting her deal only 1 damage, but it also makes her attacks impossible to stagger! And the worst part is, party members can't be risk broken, which means the Cube of Denial barrier will stay up for its full duration every time. As if that wasn't enough, the activation also heals her! And that's not even her only source of healing! Because every time a flower from Flower of Decay gets touched and poisons an enemy, it heals her for a decent chunk of health as well. These factors combined make defeating her in a war of attrition impossible even for another boss like QP. Throw that shield up and it's basically over for your opposition. Debuffs don't even do much to stop her terror either, as even with -3 cast time, some of her better skills are still somewhat workable, and she sports a great accuracy stat to boot. And I haven't even gotten how stupid her Digiheads are! It's bad enough her second summon skill is the fastest summon in the game, but the Digiheads see calls of a variety of good debuffs and their own ways to inflict poison to accelerate Pandora's snowball win condition. They can even inflict bleed too to one-up Regret! Despite Pandora seeming like the undisputed queen of this list, she too is not without drawbacks. In the incredibly off chance she can't get poison going, her damage is abysmal, borderline Kudon levels of useless. She also sports the worst ultimate attack in the game, bar none, with Force of Chaos having pathetic range and some of the most ungodly startup and recovery time imaginable. It's made even more tragic when you realize that her second type, Vine of Erosion, has more or less the same function while being much faster and dealing more damage. Though having a bad ultimate doesn't make you a bad boss or party member, as we know. She does have some lengthy recovery of her own on most moves too, that should be noted, though with careful precision, whiffing won't be too much of an issue. Like Regret, there's not much else to say. Pandora took Poison Abuse and cranked it to a whole new level. She benefits highly from directly controlling her Digiheads in your team, but can do just fine with them in the AI's hand. She's certainly a bit lower if she's by herself, but with all the factors in mind, she has risen from the dead leaves on the ground and ascended to the top of the tower. Well, almost the top of the tower. At last, we've reached the top spot of our incredibly scuffed top 3. While Poison carrying several people somewhat unfairly to the top may have disappointed me a little, it's what's gonna give this list a happy ending in my book. With only one boss remaining, it's pretty obvious who reigns supreme at the top! Our #1 spot, and our best overall boss party member for killing Digiheads, is... Dr. Gucci! The doctor is in and he has come with a certified PhD in ass kicking! The legend who I originally thought would be no better than mid-tier absolutely crushes the competition with an awe-inspiring clear time of 2 minutes and 20 seconds! A whole minute faster than Pandora! Doctor here is one of my favorite characters in the game, so to see him so wildly exceed my expectations and take his seat here at the top brings a smile to my face. With the absolute absurdity that Pandora poses, how the hell could the good Doctor surpass her? Well, a lot of reasons, actually. The first and easiest part of the answer is that Doctor has the almighty Epidemic debuff. Epidemic is straight up better poison. This beast can be stacked up to 5 times compared to Poison's 3, causing it to melt people. Not only that, it's also self-spreading. Anytime someone inflicted with it possesses those green particles, the disease will spread and infect anyone in close enough range. This also happens to add more and more stacks if 2 effective targets stand close enough together, letting it absolutely ruin large groups of enemies by very quickly and easily inflicting 5 stacks with good positioning. Not only that, but every time it successfully spreads, it resets the duration, making reapplying it much less of a chore. And Doctor himself is even immune to the status to boot, leaving no fear of being infected himself. Aha! Yet another boss, carried by their damage over time status, you might be saying. But you'll be shocked to hear that's actually not true. Dr. sports respectable damage on all of his attacking skills, and his surprise bonus can actually be quite a crit machine at times. His natural critical rate seems way higher than all the other bosses, and it comes into play quite often. In addition, he also sports the highest evasion rate of any boss, giving him an incredibly reliable chance to just outright ignore enemy damage. On top of that, he's also among the fastest alongside Machina and Wicked, and this speed can greatly increase his DPS even further. While this only applies to half of his moves, the slower skills similar to Machina are good enough to be worth the wait as well. Melee operation can almost be spammed with the same effectiveness as ferocity as Wicked's attack disruption. His accuracy also happens to be very high too, so he'll almost never be struggling to get a hit. Think debuffs will stop this absolute Giga Chad gangster? Think again! For he has access to neural inhibitor release! This injection of raw adrenaline testosterone allows him to tell any would-be debuffs to go fuck themselves, and restores 10% of his health while also being the fastest boss healing skill in the game! This shit goes active nearly instantly with almost no recovery, making even a triple cast time debuff barely inconvenient to him as a result. But wait, there's more! Because not only does this amazing move do all that for him, but it also applies a hidden buff stack of both cast time and critical up! The duration for these is shorter than usual, but it's very possible to stack up +2 and then go wild for some major pain. Even with all that glory and the top spot though, Doctor has his own minor downsides to keep in mind. For one thing, Epidemic is significantly less effective the less enemies, or even allies since it can spread to them too, that there are in the fight. In a one-on-one fight, you'll be lucky to even get Epidemic to 2 stacks, and it'll definitely not be getting any more than that. This is also in part to the 2 attacks that'll inflict it being very slow, which with really bad RNG on the enemy's part can make it hard to get your game going. This can be mitigated by stacking neural inhibitor release up to 2 times, but that takes up its own amount of time to do, and you're only getting one of those moves out at max speed before the buffs start wearing off. And of course, while he is still quite alright with that Epidemic going around, having it purged by debuff removing skills can be very annoying. That's really about it though. Doctor stands on his own feet without his debuffs a lot better than Regret and Pandora do. The clear times don't lie, and I feel that very handily hands him the top spot in the rankings. Kronke might be dead last, but Kirihito Guji has proven he's the chief of staff around these parts. I certainly hope those 2 are doing better back in the real world after the end of the game. No need to grieve anymore, Doctor. Holy hot damn, it's finally over. This late-ass video is finally finished. And I hate myself for not finishing it sooner. I spent so many hours doing runs for this shit and almost all went to waste. Massive wait for this second part aside, though, I hope the minimal amount of you watching enjoyed. This was a really random video idea that was way more trouble than it was worth. But if any of this pointless data interested any of you, I'll call that a win in my book. There's not really a totally faultless way to do something like this in this game, but I gave it my best shot and tried to get the most concrete and objective answers. But anyway, I don't have much else for the outro, and I'll leave whatever interesting stuff I have to say in the pinned comment below. Having this video done is going to be a huge weight off my shoulders to work on more exciting things, so I do want it to be done and over with ASAP. I'm going to be streaming a special playthrough of Caligula 2 in the near future, which along with some other fun twists, I'll be recruiting the musicians into my team as I beat them. Hope to maybe meet some of you there when the time comes. I very much adore socializing with other Caligula fans, especially my fellow Marie Council members! But anyway, for now, thank you all very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Catch you in all future uploads, and I'll see you later.